Good morning, everyone. For our Ukrainian friends, Dobry dzień, and welcome to this awards ceremony. I'm Oleksandra Matviychuk, and I direct the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. We are honoring women who have played an important role in advancing peace and security. From the United Kingdom, Her Royal Highness, the Countess of Wessex, and from Ukraine, 4 remarkable leaders, including Ukraine's First Lady, Olena Zelenska. The awards are one aspect of the work of our Institute for Women, Peace, and Security as we mark the 10th anniversary of our mission. We continue to be engaged in cutting-edge research. We have produced the first ever index on the well-being of women that focuses on inclusion, justice, and security, and ranks over 170 countries on the well-being of women, because the well-being of women and the well-being of nations goes hand in hand. We have a strong focus on the security threat that climate change poses, as displacement increases and there is growing competition for diminishing resources, and women are critical in adaptation and mitigation. We impact policymaking globally through the participation in multilateral and bilateral collaborations on some of the most pressing issues of our time. The gender apartheid being perpetrated by the Taliban in Afghanistan, the only country in the world that today does not allow girls to go to school. The protest in Iran by women and student-led, and their rallying cry for women, life, and freedom. The repression in Burma and the targeted attacks on women by the military coup. The importance of the Women, Peace, and Security framework in Ukraine during this terrible war and beyond. And we equip the next generation of leaders here at Georgetown, like the students in this room, through our Gender, Peace, and Security graduate certificate, classes, and programs. And we are always so happy to have Secretary Clinton back with us at Georgetown. We are grateful to her for her support of the Institute as our honorary founding chair, for her engagement on some of our most important initiatives, and for her continuing inspiration. It is particularly significant to have her with us today as we focus on the work that needs to be done to address the horrific crime of sexual violence and conflict, something she provided significant leadership to as Secretary of State, as well as on the need to support Ukraine in all the ways that we can in this time of Russia's ongoing assault. Secretary Clinton has made many trips to Ukraine over many years and has always made a point of supporting Ukraine's democracy and engaging with the women of Ukraine, including her earliest involvement in the struggle against human trafficking. It was a group of Ukrainian women who first told her about the problem 25 years ago. Let me add a very special welcome to members of the diplomatic corps who are here, the ambassadors from Albania, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Ireland, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, and Norway. And I want to thank the ambassador of the United Kingdom, Dame Karen Pierce, for her and her government's cooperation in this program, as well as the ambassador from Ukraine, Oksana Markarova, and her government. Could the two of you please stand so we can demonstrate our support and thanks? I also want to welcome the United States government officials from the White House, State Department, and USAID's leadership, and many representatives of the Ukrainian community, including our Ukrainian students, Afghan women leaders, and students active on Iran. And finally, a warm welcome to the Georgetown ambassadors for the Institute who have traveled from across the United States and overseas to be with us. It is now my great pleasure to introduce President Jack DeGioia, who has led this university with distinction, certainly academically, but also on our commitment to public service as exemplified in the credo, women and men for others. We are very grateful to him for his unstinting support for the work of the Institute, for being with us today, and for all that he does to be so supportive. Please welcome President Jack DeGioia.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all as we present the 2022 Hillary Rodham Clinton Awards for Advancing Women in Peace and Security. And this is a special opportunity for our community to recognize the leadership of 5 incredible honorees, women who have demonstrated a deep commitment to protecting and empowering the voices of women. I wish to express our gratitude to Her Royal Highness, the Countess of Wessex, for her global efforts to advance gender equality and for her work on behalf of women in conflicts around the world, including Ukraine. I'd like to offer my deep appreciation to these 4 extraordinary leaders in Ukraine. The First Lady of Ukraine, Olena Zelenska, Kateryna Levchenko, Natalia Karbowska, and Oleksandra Matviychuk. It's an honor to have this moment to recognize your important contributions to your country in the midst of this devastating conflict. To present these awards, we're honored to have with us the Honorable Hillary Rodham Clinton, Honorary Founding Chair of the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. And as always, we deeply appreciate your presence, Secretary Clinton. Launched in 2011, Georgetown's Institute for Women, Peace, and Security, led by our Executive Director, Ambassador Milan Verveer, has become a global leader in studying and highlighting the role of women in the promotion of peace and the advancement of economic and social development. Since its founding, the Institute has sought to engage in dialogue, to study best practices and approaches, and to amplify women's voices through research, academic courses, and events. The Institute has launched initiatives such as Onward for Afghan Women, focused on the experiences and insights of Afghan women leaders, has created an interview series which focuses on the untold stories of peace builders, and has held meaningful events such as the one earlier this semester with global fashion designer and advocate for women's leadership, Diane von Furstenberg, and Georgetown student leaders from Ukraine, Afghanistan, and Iran. Each of these efforts bring our students, faculty, and staff together with global leaders to advance conversations around women, peace, and security. And we're deeply grateful to the Institute and to Ambassador Verveer for the many ways that the Institute is strengthening collaboration and partnership, advancing research, and deepening our understandings of the cultural, economic, and political issues at stake. This morning, we are able to honor the courage and leadership of these individuals who have championed women's equality globally and the rights and role of Ukrainian women during a devastating conflict and a fight for peace. In these awards, we recognize Secretary Clinton's distinguished career of public service and her promotion of women's rights. We recognize the importance of ensuring equality, empowerment, and engagement for all women in the work of peace building. It's an honor to come together to present the 2022 Hillary Rodham Clinton Awards for Advancing Women in Peace and Security. Before the presentation of these awards, I'd first like you all to join me in welcoming Secretary Clinton to the stage to share with us a few words. Secretary Clinton.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, President DeGioia, for your visionary leadership. Being married to a Hoya means that I follow what happens here at Georgetown very closely, and your commitment and the university's commitment to nurturing diplomats, peacemakers, and leaders is unique, and we are very grateful to you. To my friend and colleague, Ambassador Milan Verveer, thank you for your continuing leadership in so many areas, but particularly of the Institute here at Georgetown. You truly are, Milan, an unparalleled champion for women and girls around the world. And thanks to all of you. Yes, let's give Ambassador Verveer a round of applause. And thanks, too, to everyone in attendance, both here in this beautiful Gaston Hall and online, where I hear several thousands of people have signed up to be part of this ceremony. We thank you for joining the honoring and celebration of women who are working so hard to try to ensure that each generation is born into a world better than the one before. But as we know, it is not easy. Since the founding, as President DeGioia said, of the Institute, it has hosted global summits and symposia. It's nurtured the next generation of women change makers. It's expanded the conversation globally about women's roles in every sphere of public life. And so there has been a bright spotlight that is shining right here from Georgetown about what is going on, the advances and the setbacks when it comes to women's equality and empowerment and engagement, as President DeGioia said. Yet despite all the progress, this event seems to grow more timely and urgent each time we are together. And this year is no different. Just 2 weeks ago, I joined Vital Voices and a coalition of leaders to loudly support the brave women of Iran protesting for their basic human rights after the murder of Mahsa Amini at the hands of the police. I think all of us have to send whatever support that we can to those women and girls and men and boys who are still in the streets of Iran, who are protesting not only her killing, the killing of hundreds more, the imprisonment of tens of thousands, all seeking their human rights, their rights as individuals to the dignity, the respect, and the opportunity to live in a country that lifts them up and not puts them down. And in Iran, and sadly so many other places, we've seen an alarming rise in gender-based violence. We'll hear about some of that today, but we know that in Ukraine and Yemen, Tigray, so many other places, women and girls are caught up in conflict, and they are victims of horrific sexual violence being used as a tactic of war. This is nothing new, as we know. In my time as Secretary of State, I traveled to conflict zones like the Democratic Republic of Congo, to Bosnia, other places, to meet with survivors. And I saw firsthand that women are not just victims of war. They are agents of peace. And that's why, as Secretary, with Milan's strong support and leadership, I championed UN Security Council resolutions recognizing the unique impact of conflict on women and girls, the importance of having women in peacekeeping and security missions, the mandating of peacekeeping missions to protect women and girls from sexual violence in areas of armed conflict, and then to have women at peace tables when peace was finally being negotiated. I was heartened to see meaningful commitments come out of the Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict Initiative Conference in London last month. And I was thrilled that President Biden has vowed to punish acts of conflict-related sexual violence through sanctions. And I stand with the Georgetown Institute in urging the United Nations and other nations to do the same. Because accountability is particularly important when violence is committed by people in positions of authority, including the military, or with the complicity of people in positions of authority. I've heard from women over and over that a huge reason these crimes are so rampant is that they continue to be perpetrated with impunity. So we must respond to weaponized sexual violence with stringent, severe consequences. Those who attack civilian populations using systemic rape are guilty of crimes against humanity and must be held to account. Such atrocities have no place in any society, and we must work diligently and urgently to purge them from conflict zones. But amid such abject inhumanity, we also see women leading the way forward. We've seen survivors of attacks summon the courage to rebuild their lives and their communities. We've seen healthcare workers sacrifice comfortable careers so they can treat the wounded and damaged. We've seen civil society leaders come together to combat this epidemic of violence. And we've seen women like the ones we are honoring today dedicating their lives to keeping women in conflict zones safe and holding perpetrators of gendered violence accountable. This all reminds me very vividly of the importance of this institute's work. When this institute was started back in 2011, it was the only one of its kind in the world. And it was so appropriate that it would be placed right here at Georgetown. There are some offshoots now, but I think it's fair to say, based on my many conversations and my frequent travels, that people still look to the Georgetown Institute on Women, Peace, and Security as the standard setter and bearer. And the women we are here to celebrate belong in the list of women who have been honored, and a few very good allied men during the Institute's last years. Olena Zelenska, as First Lady of Ukraine, has been a forceful advocate against Russia's barbaric invasion and a relentless champion of her determined people. When I met with her a few months ago in New York, where she was launching her charitable foundation to raise support for the many needs that the Ukrainian people have, I asked her, what is the most important thing that I and others can do to help you? And she said, I need help taking care of children in pediatric wards in hospitals. I need special cribs for children being born prematurely because of war, which often has that effect. I need supplies. I need help to make sure that our children don't suffer any more than they already are. Nobel Prize winner Oleksandra Matviychuk, whose organization, the Center for Civil Liberties, is working to document the sexual violence of Russia's war so that perpetrators can be prosecuted. And I think her work is going to really be essential as we move through this conflict, hopefully to some outcome that preserves Ukrainian autonomy, freedom, and democracy, but still continues to focus on holding people accountable. Natalia Karbowska, who leads the Ukrainian Women's Fund, is bringing critical resources to women's organizations on the front lines of the conflict. And Kateryna Levchenko, who as Ukraine's governmental commissioner for gender policy, coordinates and monitors gender policy across ministries. And I first met Kateryna back in the 90s when she was already on the front lines of advocacy for protecting women and girls. And today we are also honoring Her Royal Highness, the Countess of Wessex, who has devoted her time to supporting the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. She has traveled to some of the most violent and difficult conflict zones to meet with survivors and help spotlight their needs. And she's played a pivotal role in her country's initiative to rally global action to end sexual violence in armed conflict. So each of today's honorees is doing extraordinary work to address sexual violence in conflict zones and encourage women's meaningful participation in the peace building and security processes. This is such an important mission. I hope after you hear about our honorees, you see some videos and hear the descriptions of their work. You will leave here even more filled with hope and possibility for the future. Don't let these terrible stories of atrocities, cruelty, and barbarism take you down, but instead, may they fill you with greater resolve to be part of a community around our world that does all we can to end these kinds of conflicts and end the violence against those who are affected. I'm very grateful for today's honorees, for Georgetown, and for the Institute, and I hope that all of the students will learn more about this work, and in whatever way you can, make a commitment to turning the hopes and the dreams of these honorees into a reality for the future. Thank you all very much.
The survivors of conflict, whether they be female or male, are at the heart of everything we all do, and we all know that so much more needs to be done. We must ensure that the silence that hides pain and suffering is turned into voices of hope, encouraging more women peace builders, female mediators, as well as supporting the survivors of sexual violence in conflict. As someone who firmly believes in the equality of men and women,
it has made me even more determined to use my position to break down the silence around sexual violence.
If we can keep coming together and talking to each other,
we can give survivors a voice. We can break down the stigma they face.
And we can move some of these critical points forward.
So let's keep going, because it's so important.
Her Royal Highness, the Countess of Wessex, has been dedicated to addressing the horrible crime of sexual violence and conflict. Even as we gather here today, this continues to terrorize predominantly women and girls, but also men and boys. In conflicts raging around the world, from Afghanistan to Myanmar, from the DRC to Ukraine, and so many other places. In areas under occupation by Russian soldiers, countless cases of multiple rapes, too horrific to describe, have been reported. As one Ukrainian official said, the weapon of sexual violence is as destructive as any artillery shell, and Her Royal Highness has brought greater public awareness to this terrible violence perpetrated in Ukraine today. She has traveled into conflict areas including Kosovo, Kenya, South Sudan, Sierra Leone, the DRC, and others to respond to the needs of survivors. as well as to tackle the stigma and pain that endure and do not diminish with time. She listens to their harrowing stories, is inspired by their determination not to be defined by what's happened to them, even as they need our help, support, acceptance, and justice. Many survivors are twice traumatized, first by the violence inflicted by the perpetrator, and then by the indifferent reaction of society and governments. Access to justice, accountability for the crimes, and prosecution of the perpetrators demands action. Yet prosecution levels remain low and impunity flourishes. Her Royal Highness has provided active leadership to the United Kingdom's International Prevention of Sexual Violence and Conflict Initiative and its conference that just concluded in London, urging prevention, greater response, justice, and accountability. Whether at the PSVI conference or at the United Nations or in country visits, whether speaking to the media or exploring greater private sector engagement, she uses her influential platform to support peacemakers and to prevent sexual violence and conflict. She's been calling for an end to barriers, encouraging societies to embrace those who innocently fall victim to the brutality of others, and to create environments where survivors can come forward, seek support, have justice rendered, and rebuild their lives. She's told survivors that her commitment to them is that she will raise her voice and continue to seek ways to end the stigma they live with. She will push for opportunities for justice and encourage people in positions of influence to engage in offering better support. That commitment that she has made over the years is as strong today as when she first said that. Now for the citation. For her commitment to service, powerful advocacy, and engagement with the global community to support survivors and bring an end to conflict-related sexual violence, for lending her voice and platform to raise public awareness on issues that impact women and girls and put a spotlight on the effective and important role women play in peace building, and for providing hope to many who desperately want to have their lives back. Georgetown is proud to present the 2022 Hillary Rodham Clinton Award for Advancing Women in Peace and Security to Her Royal Highness, the Countess of Wessex.
Secretary Clinton, Ambassador Verveer, President Goya. Let me begin by thanking both you, Secretary Clinton and Ambassador Verveer, for what you have both done to promote gender equality. Your exceptional leadership and vision has raised international awareness of the need to shape foreign policy with women and girls at its core. I don't think you have any idea how much you have achieved. I am also humbled to be sharing the stage with First Lady Mrs. Zelenska, Kateryna, Natalia, and Oleksandra. Each of you are showing the world how women are the first responders in times of crisis and in building peace. I congratulate all of you for your vital work in supporting Ukrainians in their hour of need, both now and as you have done for over a number of years. Your Excellencies, ambassadors, professors, and students, it is a privilege to be standing in front of all of you today and to have this opportunity to address you. Let me first say that the Women, Peace and Security agenda reflects the very best of humanity. It has become my handrail and my inspiration. Women peace builders across the globe let nothing stand in their way in order to seek ways of resolving conflict and building sustainable peace. Yet on many occasions, the work they do puts them in harm's way because they have to challenge authority and those bearing arms to make changes. Often this leads to detention, threats, expulsion, sexual violence, torture, and even death. I have to ask myself, how can it be that women who are trying to bring about peace, trying to support those in need, and trying to make the world a better place to live in, have to place themselves at risk in order to do so, and in order to do what is right? And why, when it comes to negotiating peace, is it so very hard to get a seat at the table for them, to be heard, to be trusted, and to be taken seriously? The question often posed is, does a woman have the proper credentials? This seems to me to be extraordinary because no woman putting herself into that situation would ever do so without being extremely competent. And yet her credibility is challenged, while the capacity or credentials of the men in the room are rarely in question. Would you just forgive me for a minute? I just need a tissue. It's all right. Thank you. Sorry. Okay, that's a first for me. But you didn't want me to carry on sniffing throughout. Okay, so the capacity or credentials of the men in the room are very rarely questioned. My work with women activists and peace builders is something in which I hold huge pride. I listen to their voices and I hear courage and commitment in every word. They work tirelessly without seeking recognition or accolade, moving heaven and earth to protect and support those in need. Who was it who ensured that scarce PPE was sourced in many challenged populations around the world when COVID hit? Who organized food distribution channels and trained people in how to work safely during the pandemic? Who are the first people to respond to all crises when conflict comes to a country and assist those who find themselves in the innocent victims of war, homeless, scared, and confused, as well as the raped and abused? I stand in awe of their determination to bring peace and harmony to their communities regardless of the threats they face, and I will continue to use my voice to support their efforts to ensure they are safe and their work is recognized and respected. I now turn to the worst of humanity, and of course I'm referring to the issue of conflict-related sexual violence, which is known to be often systematically planned and deployed as a weapon of war. For many years, rape and other forms of sexual violence, which are perpetrated against women, men, boys, and girls, have been viewed as inevitable collateral damage of war and something that cannot be tackled. Well, that's simply not good enough, and we know it's not the case. Just because something is hard does not mean it is impossible to solve, and indeed prevent. As emphasized by the UN Special Representative Pramila Patten, the UK's Foreign Office, the US government, and most recently encapsulated in the PSVI Conference's political declaration, conflict-related sexual violence must be prevented by tackling its root causes of patriarchy and gender inequality. What is required is for leaders everywhere to step up and help to change attitudes. Beyond political leaders, religious leaders and community elders, educationalists and influencers all have a more local but important role to play. Until people to whom others look to give them direction, the change in how society views violence towards women and girls in peacetime as well as in conflict will remain, and sadly our work will continue to be reactive. The abuse will prevail and the opportunity of gaining justice will be impaired. Unless young boys learn that they need to protect their mothers, wives, daughters, sisters, and grandmothers and aunts, then we will continue to see the atrocities carried out on innocent victims. We must also do more to help and promote the survivor-led services that are providing holistic support, which gives victims the chance to recover, regain some control in their lives, and seek restitution for the crimes committed against them. When countries employed the use of chemical weapons in World War I, it did not carry the condemnation that it does today. Now the use of chemical weapons is forbidden by international law, and there can be no excuse for deploying them. Attitudes changed, and an understanding of the devastation they caused allowed for a rethink and a decision at the highest level of the international community that they would not be tolerated in any circumstance. This attitude has to become the case for the weaponization of rape. When we know that soldiers are ordered to rape women, men, girls, and boys in order to overpower, demean, destroy, and control populations, then this is a weapon of war. The impact of sexual violence in conflict is utterly devastating, which is why it is so effective. It isolates its victims. It tears families apart. It terrorizes communities and individuals. This weapon is something that requires no funding and no training. This is a weapon of total control and fear, and it must be stopped. Like chemical weapons, it must become something that is reviled by the international community. It must be something that is prohibited at the highest levels. Too often it is swept under the carpet and not spoken of due to cultural and religious sensitivities. Believe me, I understand that these factors are important considerations, but it is simply not good enough to use these as an excuse to do nothing while innocent lives are destroyed, victims are stigmatized, and the perpetrators allowed to sit back with impunity. Surely no religion on this planet can say that this practice is acceptable. Women and men are suffering unimaginable physical and psychological damage and cruelty at the hands of their depraved attackers, and tens of thousands of women and their children born of rape are shunned by society. Too long have survivors of rape in war had no voice. Too long have they had to bear the burden of others' inaction on these crimes, and too long have the perpetrators not been held to account. Attitudes must be challenged and changed. Last week, I attended the long-awaited second conference of the Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict initiative in London, the last being in 2012. Both Lord William Hague and Special Envoy Angelina Jolie spoke at the conference to reinvigorate all those attending to bring about a change that will positively affect survivors and those at risk. However, after their most recent speeches at the conference, I must agree with them that the change in attitudes has not been enough. Here we are, 10 years after the first conference, and what change can we see? I suppose the fact that we are still talking about CRSV 10 years later has to be a good thing. People are more aware of it, but has it reduced? Has it become a burning issue that is part of the imperative to strive for in avoiding conflict or negotiating peace? The answer is no. There is still so much work that needs to be done, so we must keep going. I told the survivors who led our conference that they are the voice in my head and the beating drum of my heart, and I will not stop this fight for prevention and destigmatization so that they have access to justice and the holistic support that they need, and the perpetrators will no longer have impunity from their crimes. And this is why I chose to accept this award today, not for myself, because I believe this work is my moral duty, but because you are providing me with an important platform to speak about these imperative issues. Conflict-related sexual violence is a global phenomenon. Even at our very doorstep, we stand in horror as we witness Ukraine's own neighbor raping innocent Ukrainians to try and destroy their sense of worth, all whilst bombing their cities and claiming their territory. In Afghanistan, a famine of huge proportion is hitting the population, with the Taliban having taken control, yet stagnating the country's ability to be productive by excluding women and girls from public life. Parents are giving their children sedatives in order that they don't cry with hunger. They're reduced to selling kidneys to afford to buy food, and they are selling their young daughters into early child marriage in order to be able to feed their families. Women who used to be allowed to the park a mere 2 days a week are now not allowed out at all. They are prisoners in their own homes. In Myanmar, the entire population is living in fear of being raped or abused by the militia on a daily basis. Such is the level to which this weapon is being used to suppress its people. In DRC, from where I have recently returned, the M23 are again threatening the east of the country with sexual violence, and the number of victims are increasing daily. So I accept the Hillary Rodham Clinton Award in the name of every survivor of conflict-related sexual violence, and I dedicate it also to the amazing, brave, inspirational women peace builders around the world. Thank you to the Georgetown Institute for giving me this opportunity to champion both these causes in order that more people understand the ugliness of war, so that the international community comes together to support survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, and ultimately that we all strive for peace. I thank you.
Стільки випробувань за ці місяці, стільки страшних випробувань, стільки жертв ми бачили, стільки руйнувань. Тобто навантаження дуже велике, але потім знаходяться якісь нові емоції, що допомагають нам втриматися. Я хочу, щоб не забували про війну. Людський вимір цього конфлікту, він невимовно страшний, частково або епізодично. Тому я і постійно намагаюся говорити на будь-яких майданчиках про це, доносити це людськими, простими словами, розповідаючи історії. І з часом буває дуже складно. Але я все ж таки вірю, що ці випробування і навантаження всіх роблять сильнішим. Ми всі просто чекаємо на перемогу. І ми могли б більш вільно себе почувати.
Ukraine's First Lady, Olena Zelenska, stood before the United States Congress and said, "I don't come before you as a First Lady, but I come to address you as a mother and a daughter. Our families represent the whole world for us, and we are completely broken when our world is destroyed by war." She described the faces of children killed with a Russian missile when it hits a classroom or a playground, a child in a stroller, a newborn still in the hospital, 3 generations gone when a missile hits an apartment, the 96-year-old man who survived a Nazi concentration camp and dies from a Russian shell. Civilians in Ukraine are being directly targeted in abrogation of international rules of war. This is what she comes to speak about, the people of her country, especially the children. She explains the terror continues. She comes to say thank you for the critical support, but pleads for more air defense systems in order for the rockets not to kill more children. She has become the visible face of a shattered country. This week, like Her Royal Highness, she went before the International Conference to tackle sexual violence during the conflict, and she described another weapon on Russia's arsenal being used against Ukraine, systematically and openly. Those attacked ranged in age from 4 years old to 80. She described the horror of this violence and implored that it be recognized as the war crime that it is, and that the perpetrators be held accountable. She's been thrust into the spotlight on the global stage. It was never anything she wanted to do, but she views it as her duty to do everything she can to end the war, and holds the unwavering conviction that Ukraine will win, not just to defend the democracy for Ukrainian people, but for the world. She also points out that women across Ukraine have taken up new roles. Some are fighters on the front line, others have become single parents, others are playing critical roles in humanitarian relief. Almost half of new small businesses have been started by women. Women who have lived through this, she says, will not go back to their former lives when it's over, because they are changing the role of women in society. As First Lady, she's been leading her foundation, which she describes as being about people, for people. She uses the resources and her international connections to help restore and improve people's lives in Ukraine. She knows that the restoration of a country begins with an individual, and the mission she has set for her foundation is to revive the human capital in Ukraine. She's also created the Summit of First Ladies and Gentlemen, not just a once-a-year event, but a permanent platform for interactions among her counterparts from other nations. And as a result of her efforts, critical needs are being met. She's doing all she can to help Ukraine stand its ground against Russia's blistering assault. All she can to help the Ukrainian people hold on. The strains on them are enormous, but she is confident they will endure and they will hold on. And now for the citation. For her tireless efforts to rally the world to support Ukraine in its struggle for its freedom, democracy, and very existence against a brutal assault. For speaking out for those who cannot speak for themselves, for giving voice to their pain, suffering, and loss, and for leading her foundation and platform to address priority issues, including the well-being of Ukraine's children, humanitarian assistance, mental health, trauma, and domestic violence. Georgetown is proud to present the 2022 Hillary Rodham Clinton Award for Advancing Women in Peace and Security to the First Lady of Ukraine, Olena Zelenska.
Behalf of all of us gathered here at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. For this award ceremony conducted by the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. We want you to know how supportive we are of your continuing efforts. With this award goes, I hope, even more understanding of the needs that you are trying to meet, the foundation that you have established to try to assist you in doing that by gathering contributions from supportive people, not just in the United States, but around the world. And we are with you on behalf of the freedom, security, and peace that make sure Ukraine remains a strong democracy with territorial sovereignty to take care of the needs of your people, and particularly, as you have said over and over, the children. The next generation of Ukrainians should be living in a free, whole, democratic Ukraine.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I will give a very short speech. It is a great honor for me to receive this award. But frankly speaking, I don't have the feeling that it is only mine. All of Ukraine is currently fighting for freedom and at the same time for peaceful life in the whole world. Because while Russia is launching missiles at Ukrainian cities, there is no peace anywhere, unfortunately. Therefore, please let me express gratitude and share this award with every Ukrainian woman and man who defends the right to peace. I consider this award as another sign of the United States support for all of Ukraine. The support which, trust me, every person in our country sees and will remember. I'm especially grateful to you, Secretary Clinton, for supporting my foundation. Absolutely all its work is aimed at helping civilians. By supporting Ukraine today, each of you supports peace in the future. Thank you.
Just hours ago, Russian forces began their attack.
Scale invasion, several rockets had hit various
Ukrainian cities are under strikes.
I remember this day very well.
I was at home with my family. We had explosion around of Kyiv.
I had to flee together with my family, with my kids, with my mom from our home in Kyiv.
Now I know that everything which we call normal life is very fragile.
This full-scale invasion changed the life of all Ukrainians.
My name is Natalia Karbowska. I am Director of Strategic Development of the Ukrainian Women's Fund.
My name is Oleksandra Matviychuk. I'm Human Rights Defender, Head of Center for Civil Liberties.
My name is Kateryna Levchenko. I'm a Government Commissioner for Gender Equality Policy in Ukraine. War affected both women and men, but the war crime where women affected more than men is conflict-related sexual violence.
We focused on documentation of war crimes, which is committed by Russian army. I interviewed hundreds of people who survived Russian captivity. They told me how they were beaten, how they were raped, how their fingers were cut.
We see how women are suffering in this war. They are a majority of IDPs. They do not have jobs. They do not have money to feed themselves and their families. But we often see women only as victims. And this prevents us from seeing them as solution.
Sometimes without electricity, without heating, without internet or without mobile connection. But nevertheless, we continue to work.
So since the first week of the war, actually, we launched Rapid Response Grant-Making Program. Working 24/7, providing immediate support to women and women's rights organizations.
We provide people legal assistance. You can be arrested, you can be beaten, but there are people who will fight for you.
Since the beginning of war, women became very active in defending Ukraine, and now we have more than 50,000 women in the Ukrainian armed forces.
Women who are protecting the country from inside, they know how to be crisis managers now. And this is the skill that, in my opinion, will be very much needed for the whole country when we start recovery.
War turned people into numbers. We have to ensure justice to all victims of the war crimes.
Ukrainian Women's Fund is now working on engaging women's rights organizations into the discussions and planning of the Ukraine recovery strategy.
And what is important now, to include this perspective of women's rights and gender equality. Democracy without women is not democracy.
One cannot talk about the women's rights movement in Ukraine without Kateryna Levchenko. She's played a leading role on critical issues in her country for more than 3 decades. And she is widely credited with driving Ukraine's gender policies forward and enlarging progress for women and girls. Like many who participated in the 4th UN World Conference on Women that took place in Beijing in 1995, she was inspired to work for women's equality in her own country. She established La Strada Ukraine, a national organization working to promote women's rights and human rights in all spheres of society. She penned trailblazing legislation on ensuring equal rights and opportunities for women and men, strengthening protection of children against exploitation, and preventing domestic violence. Under her leadership, La Strada played a pioneering role in addressing human trafficking, and it continues to do so today when so many women are being trafficked at alarming rates due to the war. In addition to serving in civil society, Kateryna has also served in government, in Ukraine's parliament, as well as the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE. She's been a frequent speaker at the UN and other multilateral organizations. As Ukraine struggles to overcome Russia's brutal aggression, Kateryna is playing a pivotal role as the government's Commissioner for Gender Equality. She oversees the integration of gender policies across all ministries, including the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. And since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, she's been working tirelessly to ensure integration of gender equality in all aspects of the government, from the security sector to women's participation in any future peace talks. Because of her strong commitment, Ukraine ratified the Istanbul Convention, which entered into force just 1 month ago and will provide new legal protections for women against conflict-related sexual violence. Now to the citation. For her trailblazing leadership in accelerating progress for women and girls in all aspects of Ukrainian society, for working through government policies for women's full and meaningful participation in the economy and political life of the country, and for women to be free from violence and discrimination, for leading the integration of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda across all ministries, including the implementation of the National Action Plan, and for her long-time commitment to public service, and for leading with courage and determination during these dire times. Georgetown is proud to present the 2022 Hillary Rodham Clinton Award for Advancing Women in Peace and Security to Dr. Kateryna Levchenko, Government Commissioner for Gender Policy in Ukraine. We'll hear from her in a little bit. Amidst the headlines featuring the victims of war, destruction, and devastation in Ukraine, there are countless hidden heroes, many of them women, who are contributing to Ukraine's right and fight for freedom and democracy. Natalia Karbowska is one of such heroic leaders. She is a fierce advocate for women's empowerment and gender equality. For over 2 decades, she has worked to develop and strengthen Ukraine's civil society, serving as Deputy Director of USAID's Healthy Women of Ukraine program, the Director of Women's Economic Empowerment Project at Winrock International, and the Women's Program Director of the Open Society Institute in Ukraine. She's been dedicated to building bridges between grassroots and national organizations, as well as training women leaders to be change makers in their own communities. Today, she is the co-founder and director for strategic development of the Ukrainian Women's Fund, the only women's fund in Ukraine. Under her leadership, the fund has provided more than $3 million in grants to women's rights organizations and has become foundational to the Ukrainian women's movement. She has also led the fund's partnership with the Ukrainian government to draft the National Action Plan on Women, Peace, and Security. She's been a driving force for putting women at the forefront of social change and providing them with access to resources, expertise, and structural support. The war has had a devastating impact on women and girls across the country. And since the war, Natalia has been working on overdrive to provide funding and humanitarian assistance to thousands of women and their families. She continues to defy the odds and inspires us with her dedication and resilience, even when a missile recently hit part of her home in the heart of Kiev. And now for the citation. For her tireless efforts to support women and children through humanitarian assistance, grassroots activism, and advocacy. For her contributions to creating and enabling a self-reliant and democratic civil society in Ukraine, and for serving as a bridge between Ukrainian women activists across the country and across borders, for recognizing the vital role of local women's organizations and leading efforts to create a philanthropic foundation to support them. For all of this, Georgetown is proud to present the 2022 Hillary Rodham Clinton Award for Advancing Women and Peace and Security to Natalia Karbowska. If there is a silver lining to Russia's brutal war in Ukraine, and it's hard to believe, it is the promise of Ukraine's new generation and its women leaders who have demonstrated the difference they are making for their country. And one of the exceptional leaders is human rights lawyer and activist Oleksandra Matviychuk. Oleksandra leads the Center for Civil Liberties, an organization devoted to the establishment of human rights, democracy, and solidarity in Ukraine for the affirmation of human dignity. Later this week, the center will be receiving the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize for working to protect the rights and liberties of Ukrainian civilians. Oleksandra's personal call to action came during the 2014 Revolution of Dignity, when tens of thousands of Ukrainians demonstrated the strength of their civil society and set the country on a path to end corruption and the abuse of power, and instead to safeguard human rights, human dignity, and democracy. Oleksandra, concerned about her fellow citizens who were demonstrating, formed the Euromaidan SOS initiative to provide legal aid to protesters facing severe punishment for their dissent. Since then, she has been outspoken against political prosecution and has advocated for the alignment of Ukraine's criminal code with international human rights standards, as well as the rights of Ukrainian women. Since Russia's unprovoked full-scale invasion of Ukraine, she has been working on the front lines, monitoring political persecution and human rights abuses, documenting war crimes and crimes against humanity, including conflict-related sexual violence. Among Russia's violations of international humanitarian law, cases of rape are one of the most notorious. As the center has pointed out, victims are most likely to be civilian women and girls. Often they're left alone to face lasting physical and emotional damage. Sexual violence is directed at the entire society to bring shame on the victims and guilt in those who were not able to protect them. It is used to weaken social cohesion and simply seize control over a region. All cases of conflict-related sexual violence need to be reported, investigated, and prosecuted. And Oleksandra and her colleagues are working day and night to ensure that justice. When asked how she builds trust with traumatized and grief-stricken survivors, she gives a simple answer: through action. And it is through action that she continues to impact the lives of everyday Ukrainian people, bringing hope that justice will be rendered. As she says, we must create an international tribunal now to begin all the necessary procedures to bring Russian war criminals to justice. And now for the citation. For recognizing the plight of victims of war crimes and for persevering against all odds on the front lines to document the crimes in order to ensure that justice will prevail against the perpetrators. For her deep personal commitment to the protection of human rights, human dignity, and democracy, and for inspiring so many others to action, and for being a powerful example of civil society leadership, and for demonstrating the transformational power of women's grassroots movements. Georgetown is proud to present the 2022 Hillary Rodham Clinton Award to Advancing Women in Peace and Security to Oleksandra Matviychuk. We're now going to take some questions that the students have submitted. And there are a number that are directed to the situation in Ukraine, and I will ask our Ukrainian heroines to help us understand what is happening. The first one, what should Americans know regarding human rights abuses in Ukraine? This is from Noah Lloyd, class of 24. Another is, what are some of the lessons from Ukrainian women's work this year that women activists around the world can apply to their own work? This is from Lizzie Culp, SFS 24. How can students support the Ukrainians in this time? So I'm going to ask you, the three of you, to just answer in your own way about what is happening and what we could do to help in this critical time. Why don't we start with you, Oleksandra?
It's a huge honor for me to be on the stage. I have been applying the law to defend people for many years. And now I and other Ukrainian human rights defenders are doing our job in circumstances when the law doesn't work. Russian troops deliberately shelling on residential buildings, schools, churches, hospitals, attack evacuation corridors, manage filtration camp system, organize forcible deportations, commit murders, rape, torture, abductions, and other offenses. They attempt to break people's resistance and occupy Ukraine by immense pain on civilian population. We document this pain so that sooner or later, all Russians who have committed these crimes, as well as Putin and other senior political leadership and high military command, will be brought to justice. I'm still looking for appropriate words to describe the role of Ukrainian women in this war. When international organizations evacuated their staff, Ukrainian women continued their work in the ground. Ukrainian women were among those who took people out from the ruined cities, who helped to survive under artillery fire, who rescued people trapped under the rubble of the residential buildings, who broke encirclement in order to deliver humanitarian aid. Ukrainian women are in the forefront of this battle because bravery has no gender. And I want to tell you one story about my friend, Andriana Susak. When Russia started this war in 2014, she stopped her commercial career and joined Ukrainian armed forces. When large-scale invasion started, She left her 6-year-old son and continued fight for his peaceful future. She was among Ukrainian human rights defenders who liberated people in Kharkiv region. He took part in the battle for Kherson. She was in Washington just recently to inform congressmen and American people about Russian atrocities and needs of Ukrainian army to stop them. She was severely injured several days ago. And now doctors are fighting for her life. I want to emphasize on the important role of Ukrainian women in this battle for freedom and democracy. We are paying a high price for this. And I want to ask you for solidarity, because there is so many things with no limitations in state borders, and only spread of freedom make our world safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Oleksandra. And now to you, Natalia.
Yeah, thank you. I want to start by saying that I consider this award as recognition of not only my work or the work of my organization. This is for me the recognition of the work of hundreds of women's rights organizations and thousands, millions of women activists in Ukraine that we work with and that we support. And therefore, I also wanted to answer the question with the story of our grantee. A women's rights organization from Kherson, which was recently liberated. The name of organization is beautiful, in my opinion. It is called Successful Woman. So the head of organization, who is a well-known human rights, women's rights activist, and the gender advisor of the local government in Kherson, she had to flee. I saw her in Kyiv on February 24. She had to flee together with her family from Kherson because it was life-threatening for her to stay in her home occupied town. But the core team of the organization stayed there during the whole period of temporary occupation. They were supporting other women. We were supporting, Ukrainian Women's Fund was supporting this organization with humanitarian aid, with even moral support, which was very important at that stage. After Kherson was liberated, the first thing that Angela, this is the name of the head of organization, did, she went back home. She is there now. And you can imagine that the city, the town is almost ruined infrastructure. There is no electricity, almost no electricity, gas, heating, internet, but there are people there. Women, men, children, elderly, those who went through, we can only imagine what they have gone through, and they need support. So this is what Angela and her organization and thousands, hundreds of activists are doing in Ukraine now. So Ukrainian Women's Fund is supporting them. We actually started during the first weeks of this stage of Russian military aggression, the Rapid Response Grants Program. And as of today, we provided more than 350 grants to women's rights organizations in different parts of Ukraine. We saw that humanitarian assistance was very important at the beginning of this stage of the war. But there is also another lesson, and this is the answer to the question from the student. There is another lesson that we are learning as women's rights organizations, as feminists in Ukraine, that women are indeed suffering. As Secretary Clinton was saying, women are suffering in war, and Ukraine is not an exception. But we also we know the solutions. We just need platforms for us to present these solutions. We need tables to discuss these solutions. And we need these tables to be convenient for us to sit at, not only for those who are making decisions at these tables. So this is what we are doing now as Ukrainian Women's Fund. We are working with the government, we are with the other civil society organizations, we are trying to create these tables that will be convenient for us to talk about the solutions that we see as women activists. And in terms of the needs, we need to improve our capacity. I mean the movement, feminist movement in Ukraine. We need to empower ourselves. We need to empower other women's organizations and invest in our capacity. We need strong women's movement to be able to not only to respond to humanitarian need, but also influence on policies and monitor their implementation. We also need funding. We need money, we need financial resources to help organizations at the local level. And my message would be for the donors not to be afraid to invest in grassroots organizations, because the real life is there. The decisions, the solutions, the answers to many questions are at the grassroots level. We just need not to be afraid to support these organizations and these decisions. And my last message is something that I already spoke at the video, is that we need to be included as a movement, as activists. We need to be included in development of the recovery strategy of Ukraine. Because recovery is not only about financial resources. It's about mobilizing human capital, and women are an important part in this process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kateryna?
Thank you, Ambassador Verveer. And of course, first of all, I also would like to express my gratitude and thanks for this award, which is not, as already Natalia and Oleksandra mentioned, not just our own award, but this award for all Ukrainian women, for all Ukrainian men feminists. We have a lot of such men in our country, fortunately. And this award really gives me a feeling that I have to continue my work to promote women's rights, to defend women's rights, and to work together with my partners from governmental institutions, non-governmental organizations, and of course from international community, which support is very, very important for us. And when analyzing of the impact of this war on Ukrainian women, it's really very important to speak not only about Ukrainian refugees, not only about millions of women who are now abroad together with their children, with vulnerable members of family, but also for Ukrainian women who defend Ukraine, as Andriana Susak, as 50,000 of Ukrainian women who are now in armed forces, thousands of women in National Guard, in National Police, in National Border Police. So, and it is really a very big progress of Ukraine which made during last years, when we see more and more women in security and defense sector of Ukraine. And they're really very, very strong defenders. Of course, I want to see more women at every stage of decision-making process, in politics, in diplomacy, and in negotiation, in peaceful negotiation as well. And as of now, such negotiation only concerns the exchange of prisoners, or mostly concerns exchange of prisoners, among whom there are a lot of women. And I consider that it is essential to include more women in all stages of such negotiations. Moreover, we should ensure that participation not only Ukrainian women in negotiation, but women from third parties, if such third parties will be involved in negotiation process. And therefore, I am asking all of you to support us with the inclusion of women in future peace talks on the part of international organizations and individual countries. Because, for example, if we speak about reparation, it's important to include victims of conflict-related sexual violence. And we know very well that reparation, it's not only financial compensation, but it's also justice, and it is also the principle of non-repetition, includes refusal of the status of patriarchal practice, gender inequality, and ideology, like, for example, ideology of Russian world, the basis of contemporary Russian fascism, which really feeds violence, both globally and in our own countries. And the last point I'd like to share with you, just like to join what's already given by Natalia about including women in developing recovery strategy and including the principle of gender equality and women's rights in every pillar of this recovery strategy. We created a group of gender experts for every 24 working groups responsible for developing such strategy at national level. But I also would like to see more participation and more engagement of international experts and international organizations in this important process. Thank you. Thank you.
And Your Royal Highness, one of the students asked, and perhaps you can address this now coming out of PSVI and what you've already told us. What is one critical action the international community can take once and for all to address cases of sexual violence? And this is from Alida Blondonaloy, class of 24.
Thank you. Well, first of all, coming out of PSVI, there were a number of commitments made by the international community, and I think the most important thing is that we make sure those commitments are seen through. So far in this fight, we have experienced a lot of words. Now, words are important, but action is even more important. And we all said at the conference, which was being led by the survivors, was shaped by the survivors, that we don't want to be saying the same things in another 10 years. We need real action to actually happen. So that is one. I have to go on to more because there are more imperatives. I think the destigmatization of the victims of sexual violence has to be an absolute imperative. Not only the victims, but the children born of rape. They aren't even seen as people. They have no agency at all. And therefore they have very little access to support. And if you can imagine bearing a child from rape, it is also incredibly hard to form, as a mother, a bond with that child. And if you are then excluded from your family and from your community, it is not only, it's just compounding everything that they have experienced. And all of a sudden, the victim becomes the person at fault, and actually the perpetrator gets off scot-free. So, those two things are incredibly important, and I think we also have to listen to the voices of survivors, because we don't want to be prescriptive, about what we're offering in terms of support. We have to hear what they want, because restitution, as has been explained, comes in many different forms. Some people want their day in court. The reality of trying to achieve that at the moment is incredibly hard, and especially to achieve a successful outcome. If you have been raped by multiple people, the chances are that maybe one, if you are very lucky, might actually be, and sometimes they have these mobile courts that go around in various countries, but the chances of conviction are often remarkably small. So we have to get better at listening to what restitution means for them, and often it means that they want to start their lives again, and it might be training in a way of doing a vocational job, something that gives them agency and the ability to rebuild their lives.
Thank you. And Secretary Clinton, perhaps the last word in terms of just reflections on what we've been hearing today. I do have a question from Jessica Maximoff, class of 24, who is really asking about the infrastructure, the post-war infrastructure, the post-war era, and what kind of role women can and should play.
Well, I think the answers to that you've heard from our 3 Ukrainian honorees. It will be really important for the international community, not just governments or multinational organizations, but as you said, Kateryna and others, women's groups, charitable foundations, philanthropies, activists, to be standing with you as you chart your way first to peace and security, and then to recovery and rebuilding, both, as we heard, physical infrastructure, of course, but the human capital, the rebuilding of lives, and what that will mean. And as Her Royal Highness said, that requires a lot of listening and not imposition of what others from the outside think. So that table needs to be a global table. The decision makers need to be Ukrainians, but there need to be enough Ukrainians, particularly enough women at that table, or the many tables that will be metaphorically and in reality the basis for making decisions, so that this gives Ukraine a chance to, really come together based on all of the extraordinary courage and commitment that they've shown. And we need to be with them, not only till they get to a peaceful, secure outcome, but beyond. And the other thing, Milan, which I really believe is worth underscoring, when I came back from the Beijing speech in 1995 about women's rights or human rights, I have to tell you, a lot of people were scratching their heads. I'm like, what on earth does that mean? And in fact, I did a Voice of America call-in. I think you were with me. And one of the very first questions was from a man in Iran calling in. And he said, so when you say women's rights are human rights, what does that mean? And I said, well, shut your eyes and think about all the rights you have. That's what it means. Women deserve every single one of any right that you have as a man. And we have now spent about 27 years trying to explain that to people and setting up, in Georgetown's case, this groundbreaking institute to do a lot of the hard work, the research, the curriculum, to give voice and substance to what it means. We have seen so many organizations, grassroots organizations, spring up around the world. And you've heard about what's happening, led by women in Ukraine, to give voice to that, voice to gender equality, empowerment, engagement, decision-making. And we've had a lot of good movement at national levels, at the United Nations and elsewhere. But I think it's important to recognize, and as Her Royal Highness said, we don't want to keep having meetings like these, as enjoyable and interesting as they are. We don't want to keep having meetings like the one that was just held in the UK about addressing sexual violence and conflicts. We want action. We want change. We want decision makers to recognize the critical role that women are and should play in every aspect of national and international affairs. And we want a clear message that the perpetrators of sexual violence being used as a weapon of war have to be held accountable. It will be hard. Her Royal Highness is 100% right. Finding these people, extraditing these people, holding trials, but it is imperative that we do these kinds of actions to put more substance into what we mean when we say women's rights or human rights. So, Milan, I just can't thank you and your team and President DeJoy and everyone here at Georgetown, because you are relentless in trying to support the work that is being done around the world at all levels of society and government in every different kind of setting. But I think it's important that students and young people find ways to follow what's going on, particularly now in Ukraine, because we have to sustain American support, Western support, NATO support, international support, until Ukraine is finally free from this barbaric invasion, this bombardment of cities, this ruthless killing of civilians, the raping and assault of women. It is 2022. And here we are talking about something that we had hoped and thought would not happen again. And so we must, each of us, find a way to trying to end it, and end it on Ukraine's terms and nobody else's, and then redouble our efforts to try to prevent it in the future.
And with that, I think we've all just heard our call to action coming out of this gathering today. A program like this does take a village, and I just want to thank some very key people who made all of this happen. To Allie Smith, Jess Keller, Anna Lyava, Helen Rocker, Sarah Rutherford, and some 50 volunteers, Mary Haynes and Jackson Menner, and our friends at the Ukraine and UK missions. Thank to each of you in a very special way for all that you did to bring all of us together, and to all the technology gurus out there who brought in the First Lady from Kiev today. Let's just give our panel one more round of applause to send them on. And could all of you please stay seated and as we leave. But thank you all. She's waiting to go